and welcome to Talks at Google. Our guest today is chef, nutrition coach, and former molecular biologist, Kanchan Koya, who is here to discuss how we can all spice up our health. Her cookbook, Spice Spice Baby, is a first of its kind cookbook that details the science of spices with over 100 recipes that your whole family will love. She also has a podcast called Radical Vitality that you should absolutely check out, all about health and wellness. Kanchan holds a PhD in biomedicine from Harvard University and uses science-backed evidence to encourage the use of food, spices, and holistic lifestyle changes as our best preventative medicine. And now I'm very happy to welcome Kanchan Koya.
Hi, Suzette. Thank you so much for having me. This is a real honor.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here and making the time to share all of your knowledge with us today. We really appreciate it.
The pleasure is mine.
Awesome. So first off, I am very interested in hearing more about how did you go from being on the track of Harvard-trained PhD molecular biologist to chef, nutrition, and spice expert? What was your inspiration behind that?
So I grew up in India, Suzette, where, as you know, many people know, spices are an integral part of our cuisine, but also of our pharmacy, FARM pharmacy. So every Indian household has this traditional spice box with myriad spices that we use to flavor and jazz up our food pretty much at every single meal of the day. But we also use this spice box because of our traditional medical system known as Ayurveda to help us heal from infections, colds, the flu, and really support our health. So I grew up with that ancient wisdom and the culinary influence of spices in my life as an Indian. I was there for 18 years. And then I came to the US for my undergraduate studies, found myself at Harvard Medical School. I'm doing my PhD in cancer biology, molecular cancer biology. And frankly, as an Indian growing up in India, I had kind of rolled my eyes at and really scoffed some of that ancient wisdom because I considered myself a real scientist that followed the evidence. And so at my lab at Harvard, which was studying cancer, we started to look at natural compounds that may impact breast cancer cell lines. And one of the compounds in the screen was actually the bioactive compound from turmeric, which was a spice that my grandmother used to think was like the cure-all and the be-all and the end-all. And so it was a real kind of full circle moment for me as a scientist at a world-renowned institution, being like, okay, wow, some of these bioactive compounds from spices and other functional foods really do have some potency when it comes to health enhancement. And I started to take those things a little bit more seriously, planted a seed in my head, moved on, did some stuff in biotechnology and drug development. And then once I became a mother, really realized that I was deeply passionate about preventative health. And while medicine and pharmaceuticals definitely have a place in healthcare and they are life-saving in situations, I wanted to play in that space of preventative medicine through food and lifestyle. And I just naturally gravitated towards spices as this kind of gateway into the world of food as preventative medicine. So that was my journey, really going back to my roots and then integrating all the science along the way.
Wow, that's wonderful. That sounds like an excellent way to end up getting into this field. So I think you touched upon this briefly, but just for those watching, why should we love spice?
Right. So thousands of years ago, our ancestors kind of knew that spices were special in the plant kingdom. Of course, all plant foods have tremendous health enhancing properties, but spices are quite unique in that they are really concentrated sources of antioxidants and beneficial plant derived compounds. And when I say our ancestors knew this, I mean, unfortunately, many wars were waged and conquests were undertaken to control the trade of spices because they were so revered thousands of years ago. And this is because people understood that spices have these health enhancing, almost medicinal qualities. So I think we should care about spices because we should care about our health. And I think what we put into our bodies is one of the most intimate things we do every single day.
Yeah.
And spices really, to me, are a gateway, like I said, into this world of health enhancing foods or food as preventative medicine. And the reason I keep saying preventative medicine and not food as medicine is because I do think medicine has a place and pharmacology has a place and food has a really pivotal place. And the data do suggest that food can really be leveraged for preventative health. Sometimes once disease has already set in, you do need to rely on medication. So I don't like to take
Sure.
an either or approach. I think both can coexist. And spices are just the most potent gateway into that world of functional foods for health.
Amazing. Before we, jump into more about the book and everything, can you talk a bit about your thoughts on mindful eating and intuitive eating and where spice comes into play in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, we are living in an unprecedented time where we are bombarded with so much information and so much nutritional expertise from all directions that we have sort of lost our innate wisdom about how to nourish ourselves properly. And I really do believe that when we drop into our bodies and we really try to understand what we truly need, not what we want as a quick pleasure fix, but what we truly need to thrive, that inner voice can never really lead us astray. And we've lost our connection to it. So I think mindful intuitive eating is about reestablishing that connection with our inner knowing and our inner wisdom. I think spices come into play because spices are not just medicinal and healing, but they have this incredible ability to make our food exciting. And I think very often in the health space, we tend to think of foods as either healthy or pleasurable. And we feel like we're constantly making a trade off because we have
Right.
decided to follow the New Year's resolution. And my argument is when we lean into spices and other beautiful foods from nature, we can really make those two worlds intersect. So we can do things that are really nourishing for our health in a mindful, intuitive way, but we can also have tremendous pleasure from our food. And that to me is a win-win.
Absolutely. I love that. And when it comes to spice, it seems like there's a number of common misconceptions. Perhaps I, had this one too for a little while, but spice equals spicy. Does spice equal spicy all the time, making things hot?
Right. So that is the most common misconception that I encounter, which is people say, okay, I get it. I believe spices are powerhouses when it comes to micronutrients and all that good stuff, but I don't like hot food. So
Right.
I don't think I can do this. Most spices are not spicy. They are spiced, flavorful. They have different flavor notes like citrus and floral and earthy and so on and on. Only a subset are really spicy, and those would be the chili peppers, and maybe for people who are really sensitive, like the black pepper family. But really, the other spices are aromatic and flavorful and fragrant and have such complexity of flavor. So, think of cinnamon and sweet paprika and cloves and cardamom and even something like turmeric, which I think is really gentle on the palate. So we have, especially if you don't come from a culture that uses spices routinely, it can be very easy to think of them as this kind of esoteric other ingredient that other people use. And I will use them when my cookbook calls for it in the recipe. But my mission is to bring spices to the forefront of the cabinets in global kitchens that are trying to cook for health and flavor.
Awesome. And for people who don't typically use many spices, they might find that working with spices is difficult or intimidating, just in, another misconception. So where would you recommend somebody start? Like if somebody is not familiar with cooking with spices, what's one of the first things you should recommend trying?
Right. So absolutely. People are intimidated and I don't fault them because like I said, if you haven't grown up with them being incorporated on the regular, they can feel like I don't really know what to do with these ingredients.
Yeah.
I challenge that by saying that you actually do use a spice, at least one spice every single day. Most people do, and that's black pepper. So almost everyone cooks and they will add salt and pepper to their food. So you're already using a spice. You've just decided that it's versatile enough to put it into loads of different dishes. You don't follow recipes and only add pepper when the recipe calls for it. And I want to challenge people to do the same with a host of other spices, because there really is no reason to limit spice use to specific recipes. In fact, I would argue that as a home cook, it's really fun to incorporate some of these other spices on a regular basis, and if you will, break some rules. You may accidentally create an incredibly new flavor profile that you absolutely love. So when people have this question, like, where do I start? I always start by suggesting sort of 3 to 5 spices that I believe are very versatile, very health enhancing, and have been studied pretty well for their antioxidant powers and anti-inflammatory properties, and really easy to incorporate into like everyday global cooking, if you will. So I'm happy to walk through those 3 to 5 if you want to go there, or we can pause and do that later.
Sure. Why don't go for it? Let's start off with that, and then we'll jump into the cookbook.
Yeah. So, number 1, I would say, is turmeric. It's the most well-studied spice. It has garnered so much attention lately for health enhancing properties, and I think it's well warranted. Turmeric to me is like so mellow and easy on the palate. I gave it to my kids when they were babies. So if I made a lentil and rice kind of porridge, or avocado and lentils, I would add turmeric. It's earthy. It's packed with a really important bioactive called curcumin that is showing promise for brain health and inflammation control and gut health, and on and on. So turmeric's a really easy one to almost use in pretty much everything. You want to heat turmeric with a little bit of fat and heat. So like at the beginning of sauteing your vegetables, for example, say you're doing sauteed green beans and garlic, really simple. You would add your garlic to your olive oil or whatever oil, and you would add a little bit of turmeric, and then your green beans, salt, and pepper. And you've already added more antioxidants and polyphenols to your meal in a simple way. And if you're new to spices, you're probably not even going to taste it. It's just going to add that little hint of complexity.
And beautiful color to your meal.
Yeah, beautiful golden color. I know we need more of that in these wintry months.
Oh,
for
sure. Yes. And is turmeric in particular, is that a spice that you should only work with when you're actually cooking something, or is it okay to include it in, dishes that are not cooked?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the bioactive compound in turmeric is really made more bioavailable when you add fat, heat, and also a little hint of black pepper. So when cooking with turmeric powder, I really do recommend that people cook it rather than add it raw to things like smoothies. If you do want to use turmeric in a raw preparation, it's better to use the fresh turmeric root, which looks like ginger. It's vibrant orange in color. You can shave it into a salad. You can throw it into a smoothie. You can make a tea with it. But if you're using the powder, you really do want to heat it with some fat and add some black pepper.
Perfect. Amazing.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you if you want to go on with the next couple of spices.
Yeah. So number 2 would be cinnamon. We all love cinnamon. We associate it with the holiday season. And I want to challenge people to really use it year round, and also use it in savory preparations. So I love adding cinnamon to my oatmeal, my smoothies. I even add it to my coffee. I definitely put it in my chai. Something that I talk about quite often in my cookbook and on my social media channel is the importance, if you're using cinnamon often, to go out of your way to find a type of cinnamon called true cinnamon. If you're using cinnamon once in a while, the routine variety, which is called cassia cinnamon, is fine. But if you're using it like a teaspoon a day in your smoothie or oatmeal, you really want to go out of your way to find something called true cinnamon, because cassia cinnamon has a compound in it called coumarin, which at high enough doses might start to cause some liver issues and liver toxicity issues. And people are putting cinnamon in a lot of things these days because it's really showing promise for blood sugar balance, and people want balanced blood sugar. So if you are really leaning into cinnamon, which I think you should just go online and find true, or sometimes called Ceylon cinnamon, which has very little coumarin, if any. Yes.
Amazing.
And then challenge yourself to add it to savory dishes. It's wonderful in lentil stew, in a chicken curry. It's great in taco meat, or even if you're doing lentil and mushroom tacos. It
Mhm.
adds that sort of spiced depth and complexity. So don't just limit yourself to holiday treats or sweet dishes when using cinnamon.
Yeah, that's something that I tend to do is only use cinnamon in the context of breakfast or something dessert that I'm making, So I will have to take that tip and try that one.
Yeah, and there's some interesting studies that just the scent of cinnamon can be a mood booster, which we all need right now, given it's so kind of cloudy and lackluster
Absolutely.
outside in the Northeast.
For sure. That is for sure true. Um, Wonderful. And actually, so, I was happy you brought up cinnamon as one of your top spices because I certainly had some questions about that. So, um, and we can dig into it in the context of your cookbook, Spice Spice Baby, which fantastic name, by the way. I absolutely loved that. So your book is packed with practical tips, digestible scientific information, and beautiful, colorful photos and recipes. And I really like how you've structured it. Before you jump into the recipes, you're starting with information on 16 different spices, including cinnamon, and you devote a 2-pager to each one with information on history, flavor, your favorite pairings, and some key information on why science says it's really good for you, like you were just discussing with cinnamon. Um, so, if it's all right, I'd love to ask a couple more questions on the cinnamon front. Yeah, so in the context of the book, you talk about anti-inflammatory compounds of cinnamon in the context of the scientific pathway. You mentioned that it actually blocks certain inflammatory molecules like arachidonic acid and TNF alpha.
Mhm.
So, like those types of mechanisms, is that something that, like you said at the beginning, we've been using spices for since the dawn of recorded history. Is that something that you find there's a lot of research on in the current times, or is it something that you find that we should be looking into even more?
Yeah, so fantastic question. There is research. I think more needs to be done, but we had
Mhm.
some really exciting studies come out in the last couple of years looking at the impact of spices on inflammation in real people. So,
Yes.
up until then, we had to rely on these kind of test tube studies, sometimes called in vitro studies, where you take cinnamon or its isolated compound and you throw it on some cells in a petri dish in a lab, and you look at what happens to different markers of inflammation, like we talked about, TNF alpha or NF kappa B is another one,
Mm.
just different molecules involved in the pro-inflammatory cascade. And you then extrapolate from that mechanism that, okay, if it's doing so in a petri dish, maybe it would also do that in the human body. But there's a bit of extrapolation, and the naysayers would say, well, I don't know, like you're only sprinkling a little spice in a dish, like how can it really matter? And now we have
Yeah.
studies that show that when you take a spice blend, incorporating spices like cinnamon and also ginger and cumin and clove, like a really delicious blend, which is how most people tend to cook anyway. Like if you look at traditional cultures that have used spices, they often use them in combination with other spices.
Mhm.
And when you take that blend and you add culinary amounts to a dish, like a tablespoon, which is totally doable as someone who cooks every day, that's not a huge amount of spice,
Mhm.
you actually can see reductions in inflammatory biomarkers right after that meal in the
Wow.
spiced meal versus the unspiced meal. So that is super exciting because it tells you that we already know that when it comes to our gut microbiome, you can see changes in gut microbiome composition after a single meal. And
Mhm.
now we know that if you add certain components to your meal, you can see positive changes in that inflammatory cascade after the addition of a tablespoon of a spice blend, which I think is just so incredible.
Yeah, that's really fascinating to me and extraordinary, and makes one hopeful that, there are incremental changes we can all be doing that really, as you said, would benefit health and preventative medicine.
Mhm.
That's wonderful. Um, and another one more cinnamon anecdote. You mentioned the positive effects on it improving insulin function within the human body as well. And so insulin being the hormone that, our cells are getting signals to soak up more sugar and using it for energy and such. So on that front, has there been enough research similar to, anti-inflammatory side?
Yeah, so another great question. And actually, we have a study this week, literally a randomized human control trial looking at the impact of 4 grams of cinnamon a day. They used a supplement because they need to control the consistency of the cinnamon intake in the study. But 4 grams of cinnamon a day is actually not insane. It's only 2 teaspoons a day, which I definitely incorporate.
Yeah.
4 grams of cinnamon a day lowered blood glucose in pre-diabetics. So there's been studies in the past that have looked at the impact of cinnamon on blood sugar control and insulin function, and there's been some inconsistencies in the data. So we're getting more clarifying studies now that really cinnamon does seem to improve blood sugar control. The exact mechanism is not clear. It's thought to improve insulin signaling because many people make enough insulin, but they're not able to, it's not really communicating with the muscle cell or the liver cell to really properly partition that incoming glucose. And then you have elevated blood sugar and all the negative consequences of that.
Right.
So the thought is that compounds like cinnamaldehyde in cinnamon may be helping improve insulin signaling and therefore allowing better blood sugar clearance.
Amazing. I love that. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about recipes, as there are many in your book. There's about 100 or over 100. And you do a really great job, again, of, presenting recipes, not just, here's the recipe, go ahead, go forth and try it, but you give some great nutrition information, some personal anecdotes, and thoughts about what you like to use and why. And I also wanted to just call out that I've appreciated very much that you also include ingredient options within recipes for those of us like myself who are vegan, who want to go with the plant-based version versus animal-derived ingredients. So that's really a cookbook that's for everyone, that everybody can go enjoy. So my question on recipes is, can you share with us just maybe 1 or 2 of your go-to recipes, something that you might really love and always go back to?
Yeah. So thank you so much. That's very kind of you, because I really did try to create a cookbook that was inclusive of various dietary patterns, including like a healthy omnivorous, plant-forward dietary pattern or plant-exclusive vegan dietary pattern. So I'm glad that you appreciate that, because I really that was my intention. My go-to recipes, I mean, there's a lot, but I would say number 1 would be a Moroccan lentil soup that I have in the mains. So, we really are learning that lentils and beans and legumes are these kind of longevity superfoods. They're quite misunderstood in the West. People are afraid to eat them because they think they're very hard to digest. So I really wanted to create like a very welcoming version of a lentil soup that has sweet potato and whatever vegetables you want to, use up in your fridge, like even eggplant, which is really luxurious and creamy. And then spices like cinnamon. So we're using it here in a savory setting. There's cumin, there's paprika, it's just like really, really flavorful, really hearty, packed with plant-based protein and fiber, which is really wonderful because most of us are not getting enough fiber, and a plethora of varied vegetables. It really does seem like the diversity of plants in your diet is directly correlated with the diversity of a healthy gut microbiome, and spices actually count towards that plant diversity. So in that one dish alone, you have like so many different varieties of plant foods. It's also just like a crowd pleaser. My kids love it. It comes together pretty quickly. It's great for like a weeknight family meal and wonderful as leftovers.
Oh,
So
that is good.
would
That's good news for those of us short on time.
Yeah, that would be one. And then I actually have a recipe for a salmon with a mango salsa. And if you're vegan,
Ah,
I would do like a tofu steak. And I
okay.
think, again, that's just like really vibrant. It's spice forward, but not spicy. It has so much complexity. It's sort of like a fancy meal, but it's so easy to put together. And it's a great example of how you can use spices and things that are not like curry or like a cultural dish. Like everyone makes a sheet pan salmon or tofu dinner on a regular basis. And mango is, I think, is pretty underutilized in savory
Mm,
cooking. It has some really powerful antioxidants. To me, it just makes me think of vacation. So
that's
I
a
love
great
that
thing.
dish. Yeah, and it's like even for a beginner cook, like so accessible.
Yes, yes, that's great. And how about on the dessert front? Anything
Ooh.
that's a good call out?
Yeah, I have this crumble, like it's like a berry crumble, but I made the crumble part like really healthy with whole grains and oats and like fiber rich, ingredients, and it has spices. So very often with desserts, we are like not sure what to do with spices, but I always try to add cinnamon to sweet
Hmm.
things for that blood sugar balance. And actually, spices like cardamom, which is also present in that crumble, reduce the need for added refined sugar because they almost have a floral dessert like quality to them. So
Interesting.
that would be another favorite.
That's a great call out actually, because I'm a person with a very big sweet tooth, and always looking for ways to try and balance that out a bit, and that I will definitely have to try some cardamom.
Yes.
So thanks for that tip. um, so I mean, I think we've covered so much ground wonderfully. And when you talked about spice and making sure that you're sharing enough and getting people excited about using it, and getting it in their diets, just if you could sum up, like, how much spice should we be looking to add? Should we be looking to add this to every meal? And do you have advice on daily intake, and if that's something we should even be thinking about when we're starting out using spices?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the data and the research, like I mentioned, a tablespoon of a spice blend seemed to be adequate to meaningfully lower markers of inflammation. So I think a tablespoon total of spices could be a great starting point. I mean, for people, which is very achievable.
Hmm.
Um, I would love for people to add a wide variety of spices to every meal. And I want you to really think outside the box. So, like, if you're making fried eggs with some sauteed greens for breakfast, you can add cumin and sumac and a little chili pepper. If you're making a salad, you can top it with some grated ginger and cumin. Like, it doesn't have to be an involved recipe that calls for the spice. Again, going back to that idea of salt and pepper, imagine you always have your salt and pepper shaker, and now you have like three of your everyday spices that are also there, like turmeric for cooking, some paprika, and maybe some sumac for dusting, which is really like lemon without the fluid, the liquid.
Oh,
So, yeah, I mean, I think a tablespoon a day is a great starting point. If you're really aiming for something specific, like blood sugar balance with cinnamon, you want 2 teaspoons a day. So, depending on what you're trying to address, there are some dosage recommendations. But overall, I think more is better, just like more vegetables are better, more plant based phytonutrients are better, more spices are better.
more spices, more variety, more fun with cooking.
100%. It really is a win win.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, if it's okay with you, I would love to close just by, in the same way you close your cookbook, and reading off the poem that you've included, written by your mother. So it starts off: "Don't shun spice. Spice is nice, aromatic and therapeutic, making taste buds tingle with only a sprinkle, and not just in curry and rice. Used intuitively by grandmothers wise for babies and grown-ups alike, now proven by modern science to be truly the spice of life." I love that. I thought that was just such a nice little way to close the book, and very, very poignant.
Oh, my
Um,
mom will be so thrilled that you included that in the chat.
oh,
She's quite the poet,
I
and she
love
really
it.
does sum up everything I believe in. So, Thank you.
Amazing. Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Kanchan. And we truly appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. And for anyone who's watching, you can head over to Kanchan's website, which is spicespicebaby.com, to pick up your copy of the cookbook, Spice Spice Baby, as well as get up to date on tons more information and recipes. And just to call out, be sure to check out her health and wellness podcast, Radical Vitality, which will be back with new episodes soon. So thank you again, Kanchan.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.